So you mentioned that some of the most important and significant variables in human life is having true connection with others. So how do you define social connection? Like, what does it mean to be social?
Since we are fundamentally social beings, being connected to others is an absolute requirement. And when we really look at the definition of what social means or what connection means, like break these things all down into their own parts to put them back together as one term, it helps us understand the vastness and the significance to our own lives. So, the definition of social is of relating to or occupied with matters affecting human welfare. And I think we'd be hard pressed to find anything in life itself that doesn't touch that in some way, right? That doesn't fit into that definition of social. Anything that affects human welfare is considered to be then social. And the reason is because it affects our physiology and our well being in such a way that without that influence or that input, we wouldn't be the same. Every bit of our social interactions, our quality social relationships make us who we are in a way, both in health and in personality and in reality, but we'll focus on health, physical health here for the most part. When we consider what quality social relationships or social connections really means, is that in human life, there's two requirements that are fundamental needs of each human being, and that is to be seen and to be heard. And this then equates to that your inherent value, just by being you, is acknowledged, it's recognized. And that is a requirement of life. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And if there's moments in someone's life within its relationships with others that is not happening, you're not receiving the signals of recognition or of respect or of being honored as a person, as a living being, then your physiology is going to be affected because of that. And that's how it results in changes to our health. We've talked about water before a lot, and your body is mostly water. And water is this dipole antenna. It sends and receives, it interprets, it mirrors, it reflects. And what we're really understanding with social connections is just how deeply and transformatively the quality or the type of social connections changes or impacts the water in your body. So if they're good relationships where you're treated well, you have those fundamental needs met, you're seen and heard and valued for the person that you are, then your body will respond in a very positive way. It will thrive. If you are devalued, dehumanized, disrespected, treated poorly, abused, assaulted, on and on, your body is going to constrict and it's going to suffer a serious stress response, trauma response. And that's where we get into the damaging connections from poor quality of relationships. So the quality of our relationships is fundamental to health because it's touched by everything.
Do you think that overrides every, I guess, pathway to becoming a more healthier person or to living a more optimized life? Like, for example, if someone has the intention to to really make change in their life, for good in the sake of their health. But socially, it's an area where they're really lacking in life, and perhaps they've been led to believe from their social interactions with perhaps their family members or friends or maybe at work that they are not something that they truly want to be, or they aren't good enough, or they aren't at that level, because like you said, it would affect their physiology.
Mhm.
Would it override that path to wellness?
It's a really good question, and there's sort of many pieces to that answer. So let's just start by saying life itself is relational. And that means that one thing cannot change without something else being present and influencing it. There's always more than one thing. So let's take your cellular structure. There's not just two cells side by side, there's also a space in between. So all of those things are interfacing and interconnecting and interreacting and influencing each other. And that's the same for all of life. The complexity of life is the reason why the term social really does exist. It's because life is so complex that there's so many factors that contribute to your overall health and well-being. So to take something like your social relationships, they are fundamental. But there's a caveat also that if a person is really knows themselves and has developed a very strong relationship with their own internal self, right? The true self, then they don't necessarily require the same outward, externalized validation or acceptance or kind of that being seen, being heard by others, because you see yourself as both self and other. So you create the dynamic in the relationship between and amongst and within yourself. And then you live your life and your health in a way that manifests the quality of that relationship. So if you're at that level and you're at that point where you know yourself, you trust your decisions, um, you reflect on your thoughts, you improve, that's a very different way of living than the vast majority of people who really do engage in more of a superficial outward expression and interfacing, that they're looking for that reverberated validation back to them. So because human beings are so dynamic and they're so different and diverse, we're so complex, there's not necessarily something that's going to trump something else, but there are definitely aspects of life as inputs that are going to have bigger influences over the betterment of your health or the worsening of your health. And social connections is one of them. And it's how you relate to the information. So you were talking about if, you were someone whose family didn't believe that you could do something. That doesn't necessarily matter. As long as you have a different relationship with an understanding of what you can do. So if you know that that's not true, then you don't believe it because it's not true. It doesn't matter who says it. You can still maintain those relationships, but also know that you're able and capable and competent and willing to put the effort forth to make the changes necessary to accomplish your goals. And your family, who may have those judgments or those thoughts of you, may have no idea whatsoever that they're imposing a type of poor quality of relationship, you know, between you, and that they're imposing a certain type of reality that they have, maybe of themselves even, onto you. And so Communication and the dynamics of relationships are challenging. Um, but when you can reflect on them and you can understand the nature of the relationship itself and the relationship between everything, right? Like sometimes I'll consider the relationship that I have with my own thoughts about food that day, right? Or my own thoughts about caffeine that day, or my own thoughts about, or my beliefs, or my emotions. I'll reflect, but it's always from an observational perspective without judgment. And so that improves the quality because there's no power dynamic anymore. There's not a should, right? Somebody has an expectation of you, and that's one of the most damaging things in relationships. And it usually prevents people from moving forward, causes a lot of stress, causes a lot of friction in the relationship, and then worsens the quality. If we could lose the expectations that we have within our relationships that somebody else should meet or should be trying to work towards, and focus on our own self. What are the expectations that you have of yourself, not of somebody else? And how are you going to get there? And what's that going to require? That's a very different quality of being. And then you put forth very different quality bonds and connections to people when you take, radical responsibility for your own decisions, health, life, all of that.
Yeah, it's wonderful. And I think of getting to that level, for example, where you're able to self-reflect and know who you are and what you are worth. Now, when I think of, let's say, children, for example, who might not be at that level and for obvious reasons, and they need to be involved, they need to be social. And we just went through a time where that was not an option to them, which is crazy, right? But
Mm-hmm.
aside from why that was or whatever that was for, how does that move them away from developing into someone that would, I guess, thrive in a society that's largely social, right? You need to be social
Yeah,
in
we're social
society to
beings.
live. Yeah.
Yeah. So children were really, really affected during the lockdowns of COVID, during the distancing of COVID. And we could certainly talk about the qualities of that and the impact of just even one of those things, probably for hours on end. But the isolation to children, the lack of connection, the lack of being able to observe a mentor or observe others, and the difference with children than adults. And this is fundamental. And everyone, especially if you're in education or childcare or have children, this difference is that children can only live presently, in the present moment. They're not past specific, they're not futuristic, they're present. So they live in the moment, which is what most adults are aiming to try to do within their regular lives. We've lost it. They have it. So the most important thing is to really pause, any adult, and really think, how is this going to affect the present moment for a child? Because if we're thinking this is going to go on for 2 weeks' time, that's a 2-week present moment of isolation, of not being able to see your friends, of trying to do school on a computer where screen time is no longer an issue, although it is. And removing children from a social setting dramatically reduces their ability to communicate effectively, to model productive and positive behavior, also to get feedback. So children rely on it's a feedback system, right? So if I give you a compliment or a statement, or I ask you a question, there's a response that you need to give back to me. So they've been denied that ability to engage in normal, natural actions that are required at that moment in their life for their future development. It doesn't have anything to do with a virus. It doesn't have anything to do with the fear of a virus, not for a child. It has everything to do with thinking that they're going to hurt somebody else because it's what they're told. And they don't now have the chance to see that they're not hurting anyone else. They can't hurt anyone else just by being alive, right? So if they're removed from their social settings, they can't see their friends and their teachers, and they don't know if they're okay because they're lacking the whole feedback system. It's very detrimental, and it stunts their brain development in very serious ways, particularly in the more compassionate and empathetic right-sided part of our brains, where that's where we try to get understanding from in context. So context is removed, and children are developing that over their lifetimes. I mean, we all are, but for the most part, as children are developing and growing and learning how to play respectfully and kindly and treat one another, they're first removed from that, and then they're seeing adults all around them treating others with disdain and hatred and, you know, abuse. And it's acceptable in society at that time for any reason is beyond me. So it's done an awful lot. And I think we've seen the effects of that in terms of children's mental health. There's been significant increases in anxiety disorders, younger and younger. There's been significant increases in suicidal ideation and suicide attempts in children and adolescents. And, these things they're a stain on a civilization because children are not fundamentally, they're not built to be anxious. Anxiousness is part of our central nervous system, and we can go into all that another time, but there's a lot of factors that lead to the development of anxiety, and they do happen from these very serious moments in human history where crises have happened and the response has been harsher than the event itself. And so we have to be very mindful with how we're leading our children, how we're guiding them. That's our job. And how we're loving them through this. What are our relationships with them during this? Are we stopping to understand how they're experiencing the world at this time when every single social aspect of life changed for them? That is enormous, and we don't still know the full impact of what that will have on the children that were, in school or school age children during the time of the lockdowns and the the COVID pandemic reaction. We won't know that for decades, and there's a lot of teenagers that are now very, very afflicted with mental health issues. OCD is something that is really dramatically on the rise. And I think we're also, we have to be very mindful that addictions will probably become on the rise, and even more devastation to human life as a result of the decisions that, certain authority figures made and certain people followed and that we participated in during one period of time in life when there was always other options, there's always other possible answers for solutions.
It's quite incredible and scary how a small window in the grand scheme of things, a small year and a half, 2 year, 2 year and a half window is going to have a domino effect on a large sum of the population. And looking forward, if we think about how we're in a more digital world than ever, lots of their social connection, quote, quote,
Mm-hmm.
is no longer as physical as it's ever been. In fact, it's probably much less.
Yeah.
And I'm sure there's a big correlation between anxiety levels and OCD, largely due to social media and screen time use
Mm-hmm.
in itself. Perhaps you can speak on behalf of the comparison between face-to-face interaction and social communication as a form of wellness and
Mm-hmm.
bettering for your health,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to screen time and social media.
Mm-hmm. So I like to look at things very simply because when we can break things down into very simple means to understand, I think then it may have a bit more of a powerful punch. So what's really important here is for everyone to really understand that real human faces are an absolute necessity. They tell us so much and they give us so much, and we're enabled by human faces. The contour, the textures, the expressions, all of it. It all matters. And it's real, it's living. That context, that interaction, that relationship is what's real. When you try to substitute or supplement or even replace real living faces, real living voices with a digitalized version of connection or communication, it is always fake and artificial. So I like to say, think about if you were to eat a meal and I'm going to serve you this beautiful stir fry. It's all organic vegetables from my garden and it looks absolutely stunning and beautiful. And it's living. It's living food. And then I present you with a plastic box. That's not food, but people will still eat it if it tastes good, right? It's no different with communication. And it's really sad because the way that the world is going, we're more and more times choosing the fake, artificial unreality over the real, vulnerable, heartfelt, potentially heartbreaking, living beings. And we're going to find ourselves in a moment of absolute destruction of humanity, because, which I think we're not far off, to be honest. The way I see the world communicating with one another, treating one another, choosing to destroy their own health and their lives for choices that are comfortable or convenient. They're not right or good or true, right? We've lost the value and the priority of what's good, what's true, and what's beautiful. And we've replaced it with what's most convenient, most comfortable, and the most artificial. If you just consider the relationship that is between those two different dichotomies, those two different realities, you'll realize that whatever is fake can't last, right? Like nothing about that is going to give you any feedback, any love, any of the good feelings, sensations, experiences, the qualities or qualia that life truly is. And so your life will always be lacking. What happens when you are always lacking something? You're always going to be looking and searching for more and more and more. to replace it. There's nothing that can replace it. There's nothing that can replace it. It is the human face and what it gives to our communication and covering those faces and hiding those faces and being distorted with our expressions is it's not helping matters at all. So, think about relationships just like you would food. If you don't want to put fake plastic cardboard boxes into your mouth and into your digestive system for your tissues to be able to use that as building blocks, raw materials, then our relationships are no different because the screens, the blue lights, the artificial, man-made, non-native inputs to our skin, to our eyes, it affects everything. It affects our metabolic systems. It affects our endocrine systems, our hormones. Children's hormones are being disrupted just from the length of screen time, the amount of screen time that they're having. We have no idea what we're doing to this entire generation of children by allowing an unmitigated form of artificial inputs. And that's on us as parents or as adults of this civilization. I think it's really time that we paused and looked at the difference between the nature of these two realities and make a choice of which one is it that we want to go down. One is very dark and entropic. I'll say entropy, right? It leads to disorder, chaos, destruction, noise, death of a system, any system, biological system. And the other pathway, allowing the vulnerability, allowing the potential to be hurt by someone else, but also allowing the love and giving and receiving love. That in and of itself is qualitative. There's nothing that can replace it. No one can describe it. No one can touch it. No one can measure it. And those are the fundamental elements of life that make us who we are, what we are, how complex we are. And everything that we try to build is trying to mimic that. Artificial intelligence included. And we shouldn't even be calling it what we're calling it, intelligence. It's more of a coding or an algorithm or a response, but it's not intelligent.
That's fantastic. I realize like how subtle some of these changes, like they're happening really fast,
Mm-hmm.
but their side effects are very subtle, but they're very clear. And and when I speak on behalf of that in terms of like anxiety or OCD or social isolation or um, I would even just say I'm not sure the best word. Like I would say maybe self-critical.
Mm-hmm.
Like a lot of young people who are present and are living through this reality of largely screen time.
Mm-hmm.
Like they really like unless they're at school, they're not really seeing people and socializing with people
Mm-hmm.
like, outside of online, right? And that is their reality.
Yeah.
And that's what they've grown up with. And it's
Mm-hmm.
going to carry forward. And you already see this in how anxious a lot of them are, even to just say their name in front of like 5 others, 10 others, 20 others, right? It's like, it's because they're always watching someone else and communicating in that way, even though they're not communicating, they're just absorbing whatever is being communicated to them. But at the same time, they're always being watched as well because everyone has a camera,
Mm-hmm.
everyone has a recording device,
Right.
and it's only a split second it takes for someone to fumble or someone to take something out of context
Mm-hmm.
that now they're under watch, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're
Mm-hmm.
on the spot.
Yeah.
I can only imagine um how awkward that must be to live through. And when it
Hmm.
comes to how they live socially, right? And this is also happening in adolescent life and adult life, and um yeah, and it's gonna get progressively worse, I imagine.
Yeah.
um
Just think,
Now,
sit back and listen to how that sounds, even. That sounds so uncomfortable and awkward and destructive, even just in how that description that you laid out there is. And it's very true. There's more and more people that are kind of removing themselves from public social realities and creating these little imagined realities or communities within their own little worlds. And that's a big challenge, because where is, you know, where are the adults going to emerge from? It's going to be from this group of adolescents that are coming up. And what kind of skill sets are they going to have? How are they going to be able to manage the fundamental tasks that are required in every community, every household, every every relationship, when they're not engaging in any relationships? And when you think about the brain development, especially, right? The frontal lobe brain development, which is, planning and executive function and the highest order of function that humans are said to have now, as that develops, it's not fully developed in young males, especially until in their 20s. So if we're interfering and we're altering their ability to develop social cognition and social intelligence and emotional intelligence and creative intelligence, I could go on and on. What are these adults going to be like? What will the world be able to offer them, and what will they be able to offer the world when they become adults? And I don't think everyone likes to look at the long game. They like to look at the short game, and they'll deal with the consequences later. And I think that that's why we're partially in a lot of this trouble, is because nobody wants to look at the 40,000-foot view, look at all the moving pieces, look at all of it, and then be able to step back and say, what is this going to result in 10 years from now? Because you can project where this is leading and where this is heading. And if it's heading to somewhere that we're not sure, that it might be damaging to children in their later years, there's no excuse. The answer is stop, pause, do not pass go. Why are we allowing, or why are we participating in all of these changes that are happening so quickly, like you said? And it seems subtle, but then when you actually look at it all, pause and reflect and look at all of these changes in our children and communities, it's really not so subtle. And we've gotten to the point where we really need adults to be responsible citizens and adults, where, we live by morals, we live by values, we set priorities, and we have discipline. And nobody wants to kind of put forth what it takes to get there. And I think that's partially why we have a very sick society as well, as an aging culture. Nobody wants to put forth the effort, do what it takes to actually move past the problems into the solutions. It, you can barely get people to look at the problems today. And I think that's what needs to be addressed.
in such a distracted society we live in, do you have any suggestions on a small change or perhaps a big change that someone could make to make social life or being social
Mm-hmm.
more part of their life? because I find that because of all the distractions and because of all we live for now and deal with the consequences later, we are actually pushing social life
Mm-hmm.
and that simple one-to-one connection or one-to-many connection away. And it gets pushed away for work. It gets pushed away for certain priorities that we need to address. It gets pushed away for health appointments that we need to, or that we're booked for,
Mm-hmm.
which could potentially have been avoided
Right.
if we were more social.
Right.
So, what's a small change that you could perhaps suggest to someone that is not as social as they could be, but should be, and they know they should be, um, but they have these distractions to deal with.
Mm-hmm.
Now, obviously, it's easier said than done, but what do you suggest in a practical example?
So there's a lot that people can do in order to first kind of assess, what to what level or what degree are the social interactions happening in a day. I think first and foremost, people really need to be able to kind of find the moments where you've just observed your thoughts and not known it. So I'll give you an example. Have you ever read a book or been reading a book and all of a sudden you're like, oh, I haven't even read anything on that whole page. I got to go back. Oh, not that page too. So you've been distracted that whole time, but you've been forward moving, right? But you haven't been present at all. So most of us live in the past or looking towards the future. Adults don't actually live presently. And that's where distractions can really become a problem because human attention is the greatest commodity in the world. The greatest commodity in the world. It's what's being fought over in all kinds of wars for all of human history. When we give our attention to something in particular, we're giving our energy and we usually will give our money. So all of all of the world's biggest corporations and companies and marketing gurus, like everybody knows that if you can capture somebody's attention, you usually get some kind of a sale. So we live in a very materialistic, very superficial world. It's very reductionist. Everyone thinks with absolute certainty, and there is no certainty. Very little in this world. And the only thing that is certain is natural order principles. Nature itself does not lie. Human beings lie all the time. So, in order to get our attention, we have to know how to direct our own attention. So, I say start with those moments. In a day, when you've been driving somewhere, catch yourself catching yourself. So, realize when you've just caught yourself being distracted and getting out of that. And that's a really deep level of acknowledging your own awareness and your own attention, because that's what creates the human drive that will ultimately direct their own will. So, human attention is directly connected to the will of a human. And when we're making our own conscious choices and we're directing our own attention, our own awareness, then we're more likely to be responsible because we're present and making those choices authentically. Children is a little bit not so easy to kind of get them to like they do live presently, but you can get them to more tune into their body as a way to show them their attention. So get them to shift, even adults. Start putting your attention in your big toe. Imagine that you are the person you are in your big toe. And you can feel your big toe at that time. And then shift it up to your knees or hips or whatever. Or find something you can see, hear, smell, taste, that kind of thing. So direct your senses, which is kind of indirectly your attention or awareness. Most of it is going to come down to trying to find subtle, simple things that you can start incorporating slowly in your life, right? Like in the morning when you wake up, go put your feet on the ground, be very intentional, get some infrared sun outside, and connect with nature. That's one thing. But the more you do it, the more it becomes your life. You live it. And it's not a task or a chore or a thing to do. And then your attention can move somewhere else and create a new possibility for you. But being able to start to learn how to direct your own attention and your own awareness is really everything. So I use the book example. I use tuning into your body or driving. Those are kind of three really simple ways that you can start to learn a little bit more, reflect a little bit on your own attention, and learn how to shift that into your own best opportunities, right?
Awesome. I love it. Maybe as a last question, is there a cultural shift that's needed, particularly in, I guess, Canada, the United States, because some cultures or many cultures in Europe are very social. Right after work and later into the evening, and even in the Caribbean, they're very social there as well.
Mm-hmm.
Although there is still a lot of technology and phone use and social media and whatnot that might push them away at many points, they are largely still a very social society where people are friendly and people interact, and it's a cultural norm to go and to speak to random people you have never met before, and that's just how the culture thrives.
Mm-hmm.
Is there something that's needed here that's a change similar to that, which would help people and help society in terms of overall anxiety levels or health detriments? We didn't really talk much about the health
Mm-hmm.
side of things, which we'll
We
definitely
can do a
do a
part
part
two.
two or three
Mm-hmm.
or four, who knows?
This is a huge
Um,
topic. Yeah.
but I guess just to wrap up
Mm-hmm.
on the general side of things, is there something needed to be changed in our culture? Because I noticed for sure, I know this is a long question, but everywhere you go, that's, I guess, like maybe out to dinner or maybe to a bar or maybe to, a bowling alley. I don't know, right?
Mm-hmm.
Everything is enclosed to your group
Mm-hmm.
and that's it. And if you're going by yourself or with one or two others, to talk to another group is like kind of, who's this person? Like it's kind of like that's weird.
Mm-hmm.
But in the European culture, like that's not weird. In fact, that's like they're gonna come talk to you. Like you're gonna whoever you're sitting beside that table, you're probably just gonna end up having a conversation. Who knows? You have a new
Mm-hmm.
contact.
Right.
So, is there a cultural change that's needed? Is this a societal thing, or would does that help?
Yeah. I think there's always cultural changes that are occurring. I think, we're kind of in the midst, I would say, of, this kind of emerging artificial apocalypse is kind of what I call it, where in the Western world, we have insidiously accepted the artificial vices, the artificial options over the real ones. And we've actually so we've done so in a way that it trumps the value of other humans and the connections that we make and the networking that we can do and the community building that brings. And so I do think that really requires a cultural shift, but not just cultural, probably spiritual in a sense. Now, there's no need to bring in any religion, but spirituality is very much about your relationship with the universe and the world that you're a part of. And so exploring that and having a, a bit of a responsibility to understanding the nature of who you are and where you are is important. And I don't think that in the Western world we do that very much at all. I think that comes into play in people's lives. Usually it looks like a midlife crisis, and people often ignore it and will continue to choose the more materialistic, superficial options, thinking that those are going to give them, the satisfaction of what they're searching for. But what they're searching for is truly what these other cultures have. It's relationships, it's tradition, it's knowing the value of doing things together, breaking bread together, sharing in and experiencing life together. And we don't value that here as much at all. And in fact, I think it's almost extinct here. And to me, that's it's almost like when in your body, when you've eaten something that your stomach is about to bring back up, and it's sending sort of the signals to you that that's going to happen. I almost feel like that's happening in as sort of a what Western society is kind of emerging towards is this cultural vomiting of the artificial apocalypse that we no longer want to see, because there's no replacement for the traditions, the the historical context, the family values, the qualities that make life and experiencing life worth it, right? Valuable. Why we have this zest for life is because of the softer side of life, not because of what we can get from it or what tool we can use. Tools are only good as far as tools can be used, right? And that's all artificial phones and screens are. They're a tool to communicate. They're a tool to be able to, if you have loved ones in Europe and you're in Canada, then you can at least communicate throughout the year until you're able to see them again. And everything that's digital has a very different signature, right? Energetic signature and electromagnetic signature than the real person, than the real thing. And the true contact with human beings, there's nothing that can replace, the squeeze of a hug, right? The the true eye connection that we have with others, the smiles that we get, that laughing with someone. I was telling you a story today about how my husband makes me laugh so hard sometimes. And those are moments that make the life that you live, right? And we need to shift into where we prioritize those. And we get to choose. That's what free will is. There's no debate whether free will exists or not, which is kind of crazy that anyone even is debating whether that exists or not. Free will has to exist, or else there would be no choice. So free will exists, but it's a potentiality. It's always a potentiality. It requires the individual to actualize it with their attention and their awareness, and then their direction, right? Their action. And so, for instance, you want a peach. The potential of a peach is always there, but your will is actually the ability for you to choose and go and get that peach and eat the peach, right? Same as McDonald's. You can have free will to go and do that. It's far more important to be able to direct your will in a way that you know is going to be productive for you and society at large. We do have a responsibility to each other. And when we do that, we're creating a culture of mutual respect, of true, I don't even like the word tolerance, because tolerance is like we're tolerating people, but it's more of a value of the inherent nature of another being, and that we see them as equal to ourselves. I think we need to spend a lot more time being mindful and choosing to prioritize those kinds of relationships, those choices in our lives as being fundamental instead of an option. And when we do that, we'll see the nature of our culture shift and change. It just has to naturally anyway.
I couldn't agree anymore. A sense of belonging is
Yes.
very, very important. Just it's for your overall life
Mm-hmm.
in many, many ways beyond just your health. You have to belong somewhere, and you have to feel like you belong somewhere.
Yep.
And I think from there, you want to belong even more. You want to be heard and
Yep.
accepted.
And when you are, you will find a more productive, creative, and giving society overall, right? The people that are part of that community are going to want to give more, do more, put forth more effort so that everyone benefits because they belong. And it's felt, it's lived. And that's not something that can be measured or objectified, right? So that's where we need to get back to the values of those inherent things.
Awesome. I am so excited to do part 5 of this because there's really so much we can take away from here, and I really like this one because we touched on many different parts of social connection,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that next time we'll have to really touch on one and go really deep into one.
For sure. Or we
Um,
can touch on sort of the physiological effect of, because I think that's really what a lot of people are looking for. How does this impact my health? What would I notice? What would I feel? And I can break that down in a lot of detail for people too.
awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So